The Bothy Storytelling Podcast is a member of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. Welcome to the Bothy Storytelling Podcast, and I'm your host, Calum Lykan. Well, here we are again, another episode, a beautiful sunny day, some excitement has been happening, and I thought I'd give you another wee Vikings episode, because it is Vikings season, the Vikings have come. I am travelling all over the province, doing so many events. As I said in my last episode, I'd been up to Slave Lake, I'd dodged a few tornadoes, had some great fun, lost a precious stone. But after that, I headed up to Viking, and it was it was glorious, but the Friday night when we were setting up camp was, well, it was phenomenal and damp. Heavy rain, but some of the most spectacular thunderclouds and lightning flashes I have ever seen. Some of the more romantic among the group would have been suggesting that Thor himself was riding across the heavens in his carriage. I suppose I may have made one of those comments myself. But it was great. It was wonderful. It was beautiful being out there, you know. It's not the greatest setting up camp in high winds and a thunderstorm, but you know what? It was just brilliant. It was so nice. It was so much fun. And when we're all set up, of course, we're all wet. We're all kind of miserable feeling. But we get the fires going. We sit under the awnings. You know, we have a few drinks. We chat. And we just kind of gather again and visit. Because we've not seen each other maybe for a week or two or a month. And it's just so much fun getting together with the guys. This is part of the Vinland Viking Society. Mentioned it in an earlier show. The Vinland Vikings are all over Canada and North America with groups, particularly in Alberta. The groups are Vesterheim, which I'm a member of, which is Calgary, the Red Deer Heimdall Spears, and of course the Odin's Ravens up in Edmonton. A great bunch of guys, and we have so much fun. But when I do the events, I'm the skald, so I go in and I basically tell stories and I sit around telling stories, and then I help with the fight show and we have fun doing all that stuff, announcing the fight show. And I do actually do combat myself, but I don't get into the fight show because I'm too busy announcing it and having fun doing that side of it. And I was just thinking about that over the weekend. It was like, God, you really should maybe actually get out there and fight at least one show. You've done all the training. You train Vesterheim, you know, I'm the training officer for Vesterheim for combat. You know, I really should probably be going out there and doing it as well. But I also think I'm getting a bit old and it hurts sometimes, you know, doing those fight shows. Then there's guys older than me doing them, so that's no excuse. Just scratch that whole comment, folks. But no, going out and doing the Viking events are always fun. And as I say, we were at Vikings in the Streets, which was just an amazing little event. Always is. And, you know, we've got more to come up. I'm so looking forward to Cochrane Medieval Day, which we're doing. And also the Gimli event, the massive Gimli event. I mean, I'm missing a couple in between. Because this year I'm heading over to Peterborough, over on the East Coast, to do a workshop at the Storytelling Conference and also be a member of the Storytelling Conference and just enjoy meeting other storytellers. So I'm going to miss a couple of the events like the Laughed House and the Camrose Canada Day. But you know what? That's just how it is. You have fun, you do your thing. But Vikings in the Streets was great. You know, we set up camp, we did our crafts during the day, we did the fight show. We just had so much fun. And I was saying to the guys, you know, why don't we try and adjust a few things? We need to kind of jazz things up so the audience that are maybe coming back see stuff that's new. And the guys kind of said, well, we've done a few wee things like, you know, storylines throughout the shows. And we did Baldur the Beautiful one year. And I was like, really? And they're like, why don't we try the Baldur the Beautiful? And I was like, okay, so how do you do it? And they kind of do it with giants and stuff like that. And I'm like, nope, can't do it. I've got to kind of keep it enough to the original storyline and have, you know, a Puritan that I am. So that was quite fun. You know, we had one of the big guys, and he was Baldur, and he was fantastic, you know, being all cocky and arrogant. If you're not familiar with the story of Baldur the Beautiful, I won't tell you this story. I'll just give you a brief kind of overlay of it. The idea is that Balder becomes effectively immortal after his mother Frigg gets worried through dreams. She sees all these dreams about, him dying. And of course, if Balder dies, it's always said that that is the beginning of Ragnarok. So the gods want to stop it. So the idea is she goes around the world, all the realms, asking everything, the rocks, the sea, the earth, the air, all the beasts and creatures, everything that she meets, to swear an oath that they will not harm her son. And everything does it. So, of course, the gods are all kind of like, yay, this is great. And they're throwing spear and axe and fighting them and just having great fun, drinking. And he's just laughing and roaring and having an amazing time. And the only god that's not really enjoying himself, well, there's two, of course. The one is Blind Honer, because, of course, he can't really get involved in the festivities of hitting Balder because he can't see. And the other one's Loki, who's eternally jealous of Balder. So Loki goes to Frigg and asks about this. He goes in disguise and he asks about, what she'd done. And she says, yeah, everything. I spoke to everything. And he says, are you sure everything? And then she admits there was one tiny wee weed that was too young and too innocent and just too immature to ask. It wouldn't have understood, and she didn't think it would be a threat. So she left that and she never asked it, and that was the plant of mistletoe. So on hearing this, Loki goes and gets mistletoe and puts it on the tip of an arrow, gives it to Blind Honer, and says, here, I'll help you. And they shoot at Balder, and of course the mistletoe pierces him, and Balder drops dead instantly. And that's the beginning of Ragnarok, and that's the whole story kind of basis of that. Very, very brief story, cutting out all the travels and all the fun and, going to hell and visiting the underworld and all this and the sea race. There's so much more to that story, and I absolutely love it. And that's what we did for the beginning of the combat show with the Vikings in the street event. And of course it led into the usual, they do the circles of honour, they did a bit of shield wall stuff, and I'm calling and kind of explaining it all to the audience. And it's just a wonderful, fun time. I really, really enjoy working with the Viking guys and telling stories and all that. And it was nice to actually get to kind of tell a story. It was a wee bit awkward doing the Balder the Beautiful because it was trying to break it up to allow little fight bits in between, so it just wasn't me talking for the whole thing. So that was a bit challenging, and for the first time unrehearsed, kind of without any kind of serious kind of talk about it in advance, I think it went okay. But you know what? Working with the Viking guys, it's great fun. And during the day we do all the crafting stuff and just have a really nice time. We really focus on the living history, and the combat's a small part of it. But a lot of people are kind of confused when we talk about Vikings in Canada, because how did they get here? Is it a reality? And the truth is, the Vinland Vikings, or Vikings Vinland, is taken from the name that the Vikings gave to the area that they found, Vinland. The reality is, though, we're not entirely sure. The settlement's been found over in Nova Scotia and places like that, but we don't know where they actually landed first, because Vinland would imply grapes, vines. And yes, there are some areas, but it's more likely kind of between Canada and America, so that's a good chance that's actually where they first landed. But there's a little kind of historical story, because everyone's like, well, how did the Vikings get here and why aren't they here, blah, blah, blah. And the reality was they kind of made a bit of a mess of it when they first came. One of the early landing parties, they settled, they set up, and then they encountered the First Nations. They encountered some of the native, indigenous people that lived here. But it would appear that they tried to get along. They tried to barter and bond, and there's a wee kind of story or an account that talks about they had a feast together, kind of trying to get to know each other, feast. And of course, the Vikings were a very dairy-orientated race. They would have, cheese and milks and all this. And it would appear that, of course, being, in the spirit of goodwill, they gave some of this to the indigenous tribes who were not used to it and became rather ill very quickly by eating all this sort of like very rich dairy product. And of course, the story says that they actually thought they'd been poisoned by the Vikings, the Norsemen. So that both the tribes started fighting, the Vikings and the indigenous, people of Canada or America, depending where they actually officially landed. And of course, this created huge animosity between them. So their first encounter didn't go very well. Their first landing, it would appear, was a little bit of a disaster. It's just simply due to a misunderstanding and, trying to be nice, and it backfired simply because they're giving stuff that, an indigenous race aren't used to. But the Vikings have a long history in Canada. We've got settlements over in Nova Scotia. There's more being found. It is a fantastic thing. It would seem that their migratory route, it was just a natural progression, Iceland, Greenland, into the Canada or Americas. And, to me, it just makes perfect sense that we have so much history here. Now, over in the west coast where I am, in Alberta, maybe not as much. We're a fairly landlocked area, so there might not be as much historical evidence or to say that they even got over here. Maybe, you never know, they might have come the other way and landed in BC. They might find some stuff there, but I highly doubt in Alberta we will ever find any Viking archaeology. But we're part of the group, the Vinland Vikings. I'm part of Vesterheim, which is a western home. We chose that simply because, we are in the west and this is our home. But it's been great working with the guys, and we've still got many an event left this year, and I'm just excited. I love it. I get to get dressed up in the gear. I get to be who I am, telling stories, talking about the history and having fun. I'm still trying to develop a few more crafts, but in the process of writing a huge kind of paper at the moment about the Skaldic traditions to advance in my craft. I'm looking to kind of step up and raise my ranks within the society, to put some of these useless talking skills to some kind of benefit or use within the group. That's pretty much all I can do. Everyone else is really good with wood, or crafting, or wire weaving, or boat building, or blacksmithing, and there's me that just talks, and it's kind of like, yeah, guys, I don't really have much more to offer, and sometimes I just feel crap about that. I wish I actually could give the group a little bit more than just me gibbering on incessantly all the time. But with that in mind, let's move on and let's have a quick word from one of our sponsors. And as you know, the Bothy Storytelling Podcast is sponsored by ATB and the Alberta Podcast Network. And ATB have many facilities out there. Their arts and culture branch is one that is quite interesting and I love. So if you're an artist, you know that banking can be difficult because your income isn't traditional. ATB's new arts and culture branch was built for you. You can finally get your banking done in a way that works for you and the industry you work in. The arts and culture branch is open in Edmonton at the CKUA building and in Calgary at the ATB Stephen Avenue branch. Learn more at atb.com/the branch. The ATB Arts and Culture branch, fantastic. I have visited a few times, and of course they have the other one, which is the Entrepreneur Centre. We'll hear about that more at some point. Now, one of my favourite stories that I love to tell when I'm doing a Viking event is all about Thor. Everybody loves Thor, but I should explain that we're not talking about the blonde-haired Adonis with the Australian accent. No. That Marvel representation's a little bit wrong. I'm talking about the real Thor, as big as a bear. A huge, powerful man with wild red hair and a big, wild, bushy beard and fire in his eyes. Thor's whole life, his whole purpose seems to be just to kill giants. That's all he loves to do. And Thor loves getting out in the realm, but he always travels with an unlikely partner, and that's Loki. You see, Loki is a bit of a mischief maker and gets himself into trouble, and certainly Thor found the best way to keep an eye on Loki is to have him at your side. Now, one day the two gods are out travelling the realms, and they grow weary and lay under a great tree to rest. And when Thor wakes, the first thing he does is reach out his hand, and I would love to say it would be to touch his beautiful wife, but no. the first thing he always reaches out for is his hammer Mjolnir. The great hammer that smites all the giants. Well, Thor's hand snakes out and all he touches is grass. He reaches out the other way and grass. Thor sits bolt upright looking around, and sure enough his hammer is nowhere to be seen. But who's he travelling with? Loki. This will be Loki's doing. Thor finds Loki, grabbing him by the scruff of the neck and pinning him against a tree. And it becomes very clear very quickly that not even Loki knows what's happened to the hammer. And now both the gods are worried. They travel back to Asgard and tell the gods what has happened, and panic fills the hall, for the hammer is a symbol. Thor and the hammer are what keep the giants at bay. Without them, the giants will storm the walls and all the gods will surely be killed. Now the gods are worried. What are they going to do? Well, Loki steps forward and says he will help in the search for the hammer. He approaches Lady Freya and asks for her cloak of feathers. A cloak which is said when it is worn turns the wearer into a hawk. Lady Freya is more than happy to give Loki the cloak. For the first time ever, she's happy to help Loki. Needs are that dire. Loki places the cloak on his shoulders, taking the form of the hawk, and flies into the heavens. Travelling across the realms, he searches for the hammer, but soon enough sees a giant sitting on a hill, pulling out trees and whittling them down to spikes. Loki drops down, removes the cloak, and there is no guile or guise. Things are too serious. He asks the giant simply, "Have you seen the hammer of Thor? For it is missing." The giant, for a moment, stares at Loki, and then releases a ground-shuddering bellow and laugh, and proclaims that he is the giant Thrym, and it was him that has stolen the hammer of Thor. It is buried 7 leagues below the earth, where no man, god, or dwarf can find it. And unless they bring him Lady Freya to be his wife, the hammer will stay hidden. Loki acknowledges this, places the cloak on once more, and flies into the air. He arrives in Asgard, and the first god he finds is none other than Thor. He tells Thor what the giant has said, and Thor's reaction is simple. You see, Thor is a very blunt instrument. He is a powerful, angry god, but maybe not the smartest. All he sees in his head is hammer, Lady Freya's hand in marriage, I get my hammer back. So you can imagine the absolute shock when Lady Freya is grabbed by Thor and dragged through the halls of Asgard. But there is nothing more fearful than a woman's wrath, and when her anger builds, even Thor is cowed by it. And the gods gather once more. To resolve this predicament, they beg and plead Lady Freya to take the hand in marriage. They need the hammer back. But Lady Freya refuses. She will not be married off to some filthy giant. The gods now have a predicament, how to get the hammer back. But it is Heimdall, the ever-watchful, the god that sees all that happens in all realms, that comes up with a solution. For he knows that Thrym has never actually seen Lady Freya. He's only heard of her beauty. So why not send another in her place to retrieve the hammer? Why not dress somebody as Lady Freya in a wedding gown and send them to return the hammer to the gods? And the gods agree this is a splendid idea, but who to send? And of course, that's when Heimdall's eyes fall on Thor. Oh no. No. Thor refuses this idea. Wearing a dress, dressing as a woman, he will never live it down. The other gods will humiliate him and mock him till the end of days. He flat out refuses. Until the Allfather stamps his feet and demands it to be done. Thor has no choice but to agree to this humiliating act, and as soon as it is agreed upon, the gods and goddesses go to work, tying his wild beard and placing ribbons in it, pulling back his hair and tying it and combing it neat. They place a beautiful wedding gown upon Thor. They place a veil over his face to hide his beard, and they bedazzle him with gems and jewels so that the giant's eyes will be covered with glitter. And once they're done, they step back and look at their work and, well, it kind of looks like Thor in a wedding dress. They realise this may not work, and Loki steps forward knowing this to be the case, and he offers to help. He turns himself into a handmaiden to accompany Thor on this mission and help retrieve the hammer. And both gods now leave Asgard, Thor thundering away and Loki enjoying his eloquent form. Soon enough, they're in the land of the giants, and Thrym sees his bride-to-be coming. He calls for a great feast and ceremony to be set up, and when Thor and Loki enter the hall in the guise of Freya and the handmaiden, Thor is sat beside his blushing husband-to-be. Oh, things go swimmingly. A great feast has been prepared. Oxen, boar, salmon and sweet treats, and Thor is ravenous after his journey. He eats 3 oxen, 12 boar, 18 salmon, and all the sweet treats he can find. And the giants sit there, their jaws agape. Such a beautiful bride-to-be has such an appetite. But Loki realises that Thor may have given up the game already and quickly intervenes. "Ah, your giantness, Lady Freya has not eaten for days. She has fasted in anticipation of coming here, and now she has by your side her husband-to-be. Her appetite is unleashed." Well, Thrym looks at this goddess and thinks to himself, she has the appetite of a giant. She will fit in splendidly here. And the feast continues, and now the mead is brought out, and Thor likes his mead. Barrel after barrel after barrel after barrel go down his throat until he is swimming in mead, and there is a pile of barrels surrounding him. The giants try to keep up, and there is one thing about mead: it makes men amorous. After many a barrel of mead, Thrym the giant decides he must kiss his beautiful bride-to-be. He leans over, trying to remove the veil, puckering his lips, when he looks into the eyes of Freya, and they're burning with hatred and anger and contempt, and the giant reels back as if he has been hit by the hammer itself. Her eyes, they burn with such hatred for me. But again, Loki steps in. "Ah, no, your giantness, Lady Freya, has been so passionate, it has been burning her up inside. She has not slept for days. What you see is fatigue and passion to be by your side and be in your bed forever. This is Lady Freya's passion that burns out of her." And of course, after the feast and the mead, Thrym thinks this a splendid thing. He cannot believe that this beautiful goddess so wishes to be with him. This is perfect. And now hands are clapped and the ceremony is about to begin, and all of a sudden Loki and Thor become worried. They didn't expect it to go this far, and Loki thinks desperately until it comes to him. "Your good giant, Thrym, would it not be a fantastic gesture of goodwill to all the gods if the hammer was brought from its hiding place and placed upon the lap of Lady Freya? This would show all the gods that giants are to be trusted." Wine, food, the burning desires of his bride-to-be. Thrym is now completely clueless. He is thinking this is the greatest idea. He has no understanding because all he sees is love. He agrees and gives the command for the hammer to be raised. Looking at his bride-to-be, he sees her grabbing the armrests. Obviously, her passion is burning. She just wants things to get going. And of course, Thrym has no idea that Thor is burning with rage and anger and embarrassment, nearly breaking the arms of the chair with his mighty strength. And as the hammer gets closer, he feels it, and his anger builds and his excitement builds. Into the hall the hammer comes. He can barely contain himself. Closer and closer it comes until Thor sits back, feeling a familiar weight placed in his lap. A moment's silence, and then all hell breaks loose as Thor rears up, roaring and bellowing, brandishing the hammer. He pulls off the veil to reveal Thor. He roars and bellows, ripping off the wedding dress to reveal far too much Thor, but his anger, his embarrassment are there. He wants vengeance, and the first person to feel his wrath is none other than his future, well, what was to be his future husband. He brings the hammer crashing down, sending Thrym flying against the wall. But this is not enough. Thor has been embarrassed, humiliated, and he wants to vent. He goes around the keep of Thrym, killing and smiting every giant and troll he can find, until finally there is nothing left breathing but himself and Loki. And once both the gods see that all are dead, they start their journey home. Thunder and lightning filling the heavens, for Thor is still furious. They walk across the realm of the giants, heading towards Asgard. The gods see the thunder clouds coming, and a great cheer and roar fills the heavens when they see Thor approaching with his hammer raised. For they know that they can now sleep easy in their beds once more, knowing that the hammer is back with Thor and their protector is once more in Asgard. The hammer and Thor were reunited, and many an adventure they continued on over the years. But there was one thing that you knew never to do, and none of the gods ever made this mistake again after seeing the wrath of Thor. They knew that they could have many a party and celebration, but it was very unwise to ever invite Thor to your wedding. Thor Loses His Hammer is one of my favourite tales to tell. It's so much fun. It's a wee bit weird doing it over a podcast because normally I have an audience and you get to play a little bit kind of, the dress up a Thor and all that and have fun with it and just, tease yourself and make fun of yourself. I'm a bit of a bear of a man as well, so you know what? I can imagine Thor's embarrassment of trying to be all delicate and feminine when in fact it's a complete impossibility. We trudge about like basically tanks. It's ridiculous. But let's move on, folks, and let's go on to our book recommendation of this episode. Now, as you know, the Bothy Storytelling Podcast does work with Audible, and you can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/Bothy Podcast. And with over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player, there's a huge wealth of books on their file. Now, the one that I would recommend, because I've been telling a few Norse myths and I've been talking about the Vikings, Vinland, and the culture and the tradition and the combat, there's actually a book here which is The Modern Scholar, The Norseman, Understanding Vikings and Their Culture. It's actually priced at $66. It's written by Professor Michael D.C. Drought and narrated by the man himself, about 5 hours in length, but there's a huge pile of information in that. And for $66, if you take advantage of the free audiobook download with the 30-day free trial, you're saving a huge amount of money. But that would be a great one for an introduction to the Vikings, the modern scholar, the Norsemen, understanding Vikings and their culture. It's one that I'm interested in picking up myself because I love finding out more about the Viking traditions and history and the living sort of traditions that they went with. The combat and the Norse mythology are all a passion of mine as well, but it's brilliant. It gives you a better understanding when you know what's happening in the background. So do go on to audible.com, try the audibletrial.com // Bothy podcast and pick that up. That is The Modern Scholar, The Norsemen, Understanding Vikings and Culture, written by Professor Michael D.C. Drought. And of course, after our book recommendation, we go straight on to our podcast recommendation, and we are part of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. So let's recommend another podcast from that wonderful network, and the one I was thinking of today, it's a bit loose because, well, let's be honest, it's a little bit hard unless someone's focusing on a historical or Viking podcast, so I thought I would look at Press Start to Join. Press Start to Join is Josh and Alan talking about video games, movies, TV, comics, Star Wars, and there is so much in there. It's a kind of popular culture one, and of course Vikings falls into that because you know what? TV, comics, Star Wars, movies, video games, Vikings are throughout everything now in some weird and wonderful form. So have a look at Press Start to Join with Josh and Alan talking about all those wonderful things, video games, TV, movies, you know, just everything that's out there. Wonderful podcast, great fun, and I'm pretty sure they might cover some Viking stuff. So have a look at that on the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB, the podcast Press Start to Join. And that brings us to the end of another Bothy Storytelling podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I've got a confession here. This podcast has been a real struggle to make for this episode. I have hit a massive roadblock in the last week, and this one's taken me a long time. The stories, everything, it's just not flowed well. I've actually managed to record another episode all about creative roadblock before I finish this one, which will be coming after this one. So, you know, just in case you're wondering when I put some timelines together. So I hope you have enjoyed it. It is going to be a little bit rougher than my normal podcast, which I do apologise for, simply because I've just been banging my head off the wall. Something just hasn't been working for me in the last week. But you'll find out more about that in the next episode, which is Creative Roadblocks, when I just ramble to try and get me back on track, which is kind of what I'm doing now. But I hope you have enjoyed this episode of the Bothy Storytelling Podcast. Do get in touch with me on bothytales@gmail.com if you've got any feedback, if you want to ask a question, if you want to connect with me on a more human level. Let's do that. You know, I love the idea of you guys reaching out and me reaching out to you and maybe creating more bonds, because I'm talking to you over a podcast. So you know what? There is a distance here. But do get in touch at bothytales@gmail.com. Reach out to me. Let's have a chat, guys. That's BOTHY Tales. That would be the storytelling tales, not the tale of an animal, at gmail.com. And also, we do have our Patreon page, which is Bothy Storytelling Podcast on Patreon. And you can go on that and you become a patron of the podcast and help me develop this podcast. I hate asking for help, but the reality is, in this day and age, you know what? You guys are my audience, and I love doing this stuff for you, and I want to keep doing it. So any aid, any help, any support, even if it's just verbal, is amazing. Just get on there, become a patron if you can, or go onto the Facebook page, Bothy Storytelling Podcast, and leave some feedback. Drop me an email. Let's chat. Let's get together. Let's do stuff. I'll maybe even try and do a live podcast with some of you kind of chatting away to me. That would be amazing. But I've done my ATB podcast recommendation, but I'm going to do a wee shout out for some friends. Drop Bear and Panda spoke about them on a YouTube channel, and it looks like they've also started a podcast. I don't know, maybe I inspired them. Probably not. I'm not going to take any credit for that. Those guys are creative, mad men and women as they are. They know what they're doing. But Drop Bear and Panda Saves the World. Have a look for it. I'm pretty confident they might end up on the Alberta Podcast Network, so I'm not going to go into them too much so I can give them a recommendation properly. But have a look at them as well, folks. But this has been the Bothy Storytelling Podcast. This has been a challenging episode. I want to thank you very much because I'm totally behind in schedule. anyone who's been looking at my schedule knows I've not published for a while. You're about to get bombarded with a huge amount of episodes in the next few days. That's all I'm telling you. But thank you for listening, and I hope to see you, hear you, and be chatting to you all in the next episode of the Bothy Storytelling Podcast.